Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Shabbat. We're up to Perek Chavbet Mishnah Gimel. Today's Mishnah should be Leilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev Neriyahu ben Burchai Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden Amen. This Mishnah discusses laws of breaking open a cask of food on Shabbat. Shover Adam et Echavit lechol emena grogarot. A person may break open a cask of dried figs in order to eat figs from it. Ubelvad shelo yitkaven la'asot kli, provided that he does not intend to make a vessel, meaning one may cut a rough hole in the cask because that's a destructive act which is not considered melacha. We know acts of destruction, even if they are useful, are not considered melacha, like we learned in chapter 13, Mishnah 3. However, they are forbidden by rabbinic law unless they are done for the sake of Shabbat, as in the Mishnah's case, where one breaks a cask in order to eat the figs inside. One may not, however, produce a proper, neat opening, since he therefore completes the vessel, which is forbidden. As we know, making a new opening in a container is regarded as the final step in its production and is therefore forbidden under the melacha of makeh bepatish, striking the final hammer blow. Now, a dispute about opening a cask of wine that is closed on top by a stopper, which the commentators explain is a clay stopper molded to the mouth of the cask. Then nokvim megufa shel chavit, and we may not make a hole in the stopper of a cask because one completes the vessel by creating an opening in it. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. V'chachamim matirin, but the sages permit making a hole in the stopper because it's unusual to make such a hole. As the commentators explain, one who wants to make an opening in the top of the cask would simply remove the stopper rather than make a hole in it. Therefore, making such a hole cannot be viewed as a step in the vessel's production. Now, removing the entire stopper is permitted on Shabbat, even though that act makes an opening. Since the stopper was intended from the start to be detached, it's not truly part of the cask. Removing it, therefore, is not regarded as creating a hole in the cask, but as uncovering a hole that already existed. And however, one may not however, the sages permit only making a hole in the top of the stopper. Velo yikivena mitzidah. They agree that one may not make a hole in its side because making a hole in the stopper's side is a standard procedure. Like we said, the sages consider it unusual to make a hole in the stopper because one would normally detach the entire stopper instead. But there are times, however, wherein a person would want to keep the top of the cask covered so that dust and debris do not fall into the wine. So in that case, he wouldn't remove the stopper or even make a hole in its top. Rather, he would make a hole in its side. Therefore, a hole in the side of the stopper is a standard part of a cask, and making it is considered a step in the cask's manufacture. So again, the sages permit making a hole in the stopper, but it has to be in the top of the stopper. They agree you cannot make a hole in its side. If there was a hole in it that one wishes to seal, one should not put wax over the hole, because in the process of doing so, one smooths out the wax, which is forbidden under the melacha of smoothing. We know among the avot melachot is b'machek, scraping the hair off a hide to produce smooth parchment or leather, smoothing out wax and the like is a torah of this melacha. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Maaseh ba lifnei Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai ba'arav, a case in which someone sealed a hole with wax on Shabbat was presented to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai in Arav, which is the name of a place. V'amar, and he said, Choshashni lo mechatat, I fear that he may be liable to bring a chatat. Now, although smoothing wax is a biblical transgression, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai did not rule that the person was certainly liable to bring a chatat, because it was unclear whether he had smoothed out the wax or just placed it on the hole without smoothing it, as the commentaries explain. And that is the Rabotai of Mishnah Gimel. Mishnah Dal now lists 3 acts of warming and cooling food that are permitted on Shabbat. Notnin tavshil letoch habo bishvil sheyeh shamur. We may place a pot of cooked food into a cool pit so that it will be protected from spoiling in the daytime heat. Now, this is allowed despite the possibility that one might smooth out the floor of the pit to make a flat surface for the pot, which would be melacha. We know leveling out the earthen floor of a house is a torah of building. Leveling the ground of a field is a torah of plowing, because like plowing, it makes the ground more suited for sowing. But again, in this case, it would be allowed. And we may place a pitcher of good, warm, drinkable water into a pool of cool, bad, undrinkable water, so the drinkable water cools down. Now this is obviously permissible since it involves no Shabbat prohibition. The Rav says the Mishnah cites this law only because of its connection to the next law. Let's continue. And we may place cool water in the sun so that it will become warm. Now the melacha of cooking applies only where one uses fire or the heat of something that itself had been heated by fire, and not where one uses the heat of the sun. However, there are grounds for concern that if one is allowed to heat water under the sun, one might think it's permissible to use any source of heat that's not actual fire, and he might come to heat water by burying it in hot ash, which had been heated by fire. The Mishnah teaches that the rabbis were not concerned for this possibility, and one is therefore allowed to heat water under the sun. The Mishnah now cites another law that pertains to heating things in the sun. One whose outer clothes fell into water while he was traveling may continue to walk in them even though they are wet, and he does not have to be concerned that onlookers may think he had washed them on Shabbat. We know laundering clothes is prohibited on Shabbat under the Melachav Melaben. Washing, if it was raining, one certainly does not need to be concerned about suspicions of onlookers because they will realize his clothes became wet. The Mishnah teaches that even when the source of the wetness is not obvious, he is still allowed to wear wet clothes in public. However, once he enters a town and arrives at the outermost courtyard, meaning the courtyard nearest the town's entrance, where it's safe to leave its clothes, he may no longer wear them. Rather, he must spread them out in the sun to dry. But this is not permitted in front of people. One who spreads out wet clothes to dry must be concerned that people will suspect him of having washed them on Shabbat. Therefore, it would be prohibited in public. The halakha does not follow this Mishnah. The Rav says the accepted rule is that any act forbidden in public, because it might give the wrong impression to others, may not be done even in private. Therefore, it is forbidden to hang clothes out to dry even in a place where they will not be seen. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.